What if the real danger in your life isn't the person who yells at you, but the one who smiles while draining your soul? Think back years ago, maybe even in childhood, when you first felt that strange heaviness after a conversation. You didn't have the words for it then, but something inside you dimmed. Over time, it happened again in friendships and relationships at work, even with family. You started to feel responsible for emotions that weren't yours. You apologized for things you didn't do. You shrank to keep the peace, and slowly, without realizing it, you stopped being you. This video is not about obvious villains. It's about the hidden ones, the people whose unconscious pain seeps into your psyche and rewrites the script of your life. Today, we explore what Carl Jung called the most silent form of danger, not evil intent, but unconscious invasion. And the question is, how many of these people are in your life? And how many live inside you? They don't raise their voice. They don't insult you. They might not even know what they're doing. And that's exactly what makes them so dangerous. Imagine this: you meet someone who seems emotionally deep, fragile, and introspective. Maybe it's a romantic partner, a close friend, or even a parent. They confide in you, cry in front of you, tell you how hard life has been. Your empathy is awakened. You want to help. You want to be there. You think your presence is healing them. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to change. You find yourself walking on eggshells. You second-guess your words. You feel guilty after setting boundaries, as if protecting your own energy is somehow a betrayal. This is the silent power of the unconscious manipulator, a person not deliberately cruel, but psychically entangled in their own unresolved pain. Carl Jung warned us about this type, the person who hasn't faced their own shadow and so unconsciously seeks a host to carry it. That host is often the most compassionate, the most empathetic. That host is you. In his work, The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung explains that what we refuse to confront in ourselves does not disappear. It becomes projection. The unconscious parts of the self are cast outward onto others, who are then forced to play symbolic roles in someone else's inner drama. And when you're in a relationship with someone like this, you are no longer seen for who you are. You become a mirror, a scapegoat, a savior, an enemy. All of these things, but never yourself. This emotional manipulation doesn't look like traditional abuse. It's subtle, psychological. It wears a mask of sensitivity. It shows up in phrases like, "You're the only one who understands me. I don't know who I'd be without you. I guess I'm just too broken to love." And while those words may sound vulnerable, they carry an invisible contract: you must carry my pain, or I will fall apart. What starts as empathy becomes obligation, and what starts as love becomes a psychic battlefield where you are slowly losing your ground. Jung said, "What you do not make conscious will control your life, and you will call it fate." The unconscious manipulator does not want to control you in the traditional sense. They want to survive their own inner chaos. But because they refuse to look inward, they outsource that chaos to you. They will say their suffering is caused by your behavior. They will believe your confidence is arrogance. Your boundaries will be labeled selfishness. Your silence betrayal. And the worst part, you begin to believe them. You think, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I'm not sensitive enough. Maybe I should do more, be more, fix more. And that's exactly how unconscious manipulation works. It does not raise alarms. It seeps in gently but persistently until you abandon yourself for the sake of someone else's unresolved wounds. But let's be clear, this is not about blaming the manipulator. Jung was adamant unconscious people are not evil. They are fragmented. They act out of psychic necessity. And unless they become conscious of their patterns, they will repeat them with everyone who lets them. So what can you do? You must become conscious of what is yours and what is not. You must learn to pause and ask, is this emotion mine, or has it been projected onto me? You must begin to recognize the invisible strings that tie you to someone else's emotional survival and choose to cut them. The unconscious manipulator enters your life through empathy, but you must leave that trap through awareness. You are not here to be someone else's emotional container. You are not a dumping ground for unresolved trauma. You are allowed to be whole, to be free, and to return to yourself without guilt, without shame, and without apology. Not every danger comes wrapped in chaos. Some wear suits, smile politely, say all the right things. They're calm, measured, impeccably composed, and yet something about them feels off. You can't quite explain it, but your soul feels it. A disconnection, a hollowness, as if you're talking to a performance, not a person. This is the hidden danger of the persona, the social mask we wear to fit into the world. And those who become too identified with that mask, Jung warned, they no longer live as themselves. They live as a role. In The Ego and the Unconscious, Carl Jung describes the persona as what a person is not, but what both they and others think they are. It's the version of us shaped by expectations, what a good daughter should be, what a professional man looks like, what society accepts. The persona isn't evil. In fact, it's necessary. Without it, we couldn't function. We need roles to teach, to parent, to serve. But the danger begins when the mask doesn't come off, when it hardens, when someone confuses their mask with their identity. The bearer of the persona is often admired. They're polite, reliable. They blend in. They don't make waves. But this surface hides a tragic truth. The more they perfect the image, the more they bury the self. Their authenticity is locked in the basement of their psyche, repressed, neglected, forgotten. If you've ever lived or worked closely with someone like this, you'll understand the unease. You feel like something real is missing. Conversations feel scripted. Laughter feels rehearsed. There's a barrier that keeps true connection just out of reach. And here's the most subtle form of psychological influence. The bearer of the persona expects you to wear a mask too. Their unspoken rule is, don't be too emotional. Don't be too real. Don't break the illusion. And if you do, if you show vulnerability or contradiction or spontaneity, they recoil, they retreat. They may shame or dismiss you, not out of cruelty, but because you are touching something in them they've spent years suppressing. They don't know how to handle authenticity, because authenticity threatens the structure they've built. Jung called this one of the greatest obstacles to individuation, the journey of becoming a whole person. Because when someone lives entirely through their persona, they're not just lying to the world, they're lying to themselves. And that lie spreads. You may begin to doubt your natural instincts. You tone yourself down. You smile when you want to scream. You hide your truth to keep their illusion intact. Little by little, you start to mirror their disconnection. You stop being yourself, not because they asked you to, but because the space no longer allows it. Living with a bearer of the persona is not just artificial, it's contagious. And over time, it leaves you empty, like you're performing in a play where no one remembers the script, but everyone's terrified to break character. But here's the most dangerous part. The deeper the persona, the more powerful the shadow it hides. Because the emotions that don't get expressed, they don't vanish. They fester, and eventually they erupt in rage, in despair, in self-destruction. All because someone spent their life trying to seem instead of allowing themselves to be. The path forward isn't to destroy the persona, it's to become aware of it, to use it when needed, but never forget who you are underneath. Because in a world obsessed with appearances, choosing authenticity is a radical act. And the first step is this: stop mistaking your role for your soul. They are calm, measured, always in control. They never raise their voice, never lose their temper, never let emotions spill. They are the picture of poise, balance, and moral clarity. And yet something in their presence feels like a trap, like there's a storm inside them, carefully sealed behind a polite smile. This is the hidden territory of the repressed shadow, the part of the psyche that carries everything we refuse to see in ourselves. Anger, envy, pride, lust, cruelty, weakness, wildness. Everything we label as wrong, shameful, or not me gets locked away in the unconscious. But Jung warned us what we repress doesn't disappear. It grows teeth. In Ion Jung writes, the shadow is everything that the individual refuses to acknowledge about themselves, yet it is still present in the unconscious. The more someone denies their shadow, the more power it gains. And eventually it begins to seep out in ways they can't control. The owner of the repressed shadow is not obviously dangerous. In fact, they may be admired, seen as dependable, ethical, even inspiring. But they often cannot tolerate imperfection in others. They react poorly to emotional expression. They feel uncomfortable around spontaneity, messiness, or vulnerability, because those things threaten the structure they've built to keep their own shadow at bay. They will never admit they feel rage. but they are easily irritated by your honesty. They'll never say they're jealous, but they find a subtle way to criticize you when you succeed. They won't confront their own darkness, so instead they judge yours. And for those who live or work with them, it can feel like walking through a minefield. You sense the tension even when nothing is said. You feel the pressure to stay in line even when no rule is given. Because beneath their control is a volcano of unprocessed emotion, and you are always one wrong word away from the eruption. Jung taught that the stronger the persona, the stronger the shadow it suppresses. So the more someone appears perfect, the more likely they are hiding something, often from themselves. And when that shadow does surface, when the mask slips, it's terrifying. The outburst seems disproportionate. The accusation feels unjustified. It's not about what you did. It's about what you represent, something in them they've tried so hard not to face. It could be their buried shame, their fear of weakness, their childhood pain they never named, their ambition they disguised as humility. And now it's all aimed at you, not because you're wrong, but because you triggered a part of them they cannot accept. This creates an environment of deep confusion. You begin to question yourself. Was I being too emotional? Was that really such a big deal? Am I overreacting? No, you're reacting to the pressure of someone else's shadow pressing down on your soul. The tragedy is the owner of the repressed shadow doesn't want to hurt others. But repression always seeks expression. And when it's denied, it becomes projection, criticism, punishment, even sabotage. But Jung also offered hope. The shadow isn't just darkness. It holds the parts of you that were rejected too early. Your passion, your fire, your truth. What's repressed isn't just dangerous, it's powerful. If integrated, it becomes a source of vitality and transformation. So if you find yourself near someone who demands perfection, who can't tolerate emotion, who reacts in ways that feel mysterious or extreme, know this: you're not crazy. You're just standing too close to a person at war with themselves. And if that person is you, then take the first courageous step. Turn toward your shadow, not to fight it, but to reclaim what was never meant to be lost. Not every manipulator hides behind charm. Some hide behind virtue, behind rules, righteousness, and a relentless pursuit of what's right. On the surface, they seem principled, ethical, even noble. But beneath their moral certainty lies something far more dangerous, a shadow made of shame, repression, and control. This is the moral controller, someone who uses morality not as a compass, but as a weapon. Carl Jung understood this archetype intimately. He saw it not as a villain, but as a person deeply disconnected from their inner life. Someone who has buried their own impulses so deeply that they now see them only in others. In his view, when morality is used to avoid self-confrontation, it becomes one of the most insidious forms of psychic repression. The moral controller is not necessarily malicious, but they are often blind to the complexities of the human experience, blind to their own contradictions, and worst of all, blind to the damage they cause in the name of doing good. You may have met someone like this. Maybe it was a parent, a religious leader, a mentor, or even a partner. Someone who constantly corrects critiques and condemns not with anger, but with disappointment, not with violence, but with silence. They don't scream at you. They don't insult you. Instead, they sigh. They withdraw. They make you feel like you've failed some invisible standard, broken a rule you didn't even know existed. Their language is often cloaked in concern. I'm just worried about you. Someone had to tell you the truth. You'll thank me later. But what they're really doing is projecting. They are projecting the very impulses they cannot accept within themselves: desire, anger, rebellion, freedom onto others. And once projected, those traits are judged, attacked, and shamed. Jung called this the shadow in disguise. The moral controller has not integrated their darkness, so they see it everywhere they look except in the mirror. They become obsessed with purity, correctness, virtue, and anyone who steps outside of that box becomes the enemy. Not because they are wrong, but because they are free. And that freedom threatens the delicate structure the moral controller has built to contain their own denied desires. Over time, their presence begins to change you. You start to feel watched even when you're alone. You hesitate before speaking, unsure if your words will be twisted. You begin to feel guilty for simply existing in your own truth. Eventually, you may start policing yourself not because you believe what they believe, but because you're afraid of their disapproval. And that's the real danger. Their morality becomes your prison. This dynamic is especially common in families, religious institutions, or rigid social environments, places where obedience is mistaken for virtue and questioning is labeled as defiance. But what Jung saw so clearly is that excessive morality is often a mask worn by someone who is terrified of their own inner chaos, someone who clings to rules not because they're strong, but because they're afraid of what they might become without them. The moral controller is often unaware of the power they hold. They genuinely believe they are helping, that they are guiding others toward the right path. And that makes their influence even more toxic because it's rooted in unconsciousness, not evil. Jung explored the archetype of the Christ and Antichrist not as religious figures, but as symbols of integration versus dissociation. The moral controller believes they are embodying the light, but in doing so, they deny the darkness within. And what is denied always returns through judgment, resentment, and control. If you are living under the influence of a moral controller, know this: your guilt is not proof of wrongdoing. Your shame is not always your own. And your need for freedom is not rebellion, it is a cry for authenticity. And if in reading this you recognize a part of yourself, that too is a gift, because it means you're ready to see the difference between true integrity and the performance of virtue, between guidance and domination, between morality and manipulation. Jung didn't ask us to be perfect, he asked us to be whole. And that wholeness begins when we dare to see that sometimes the most righteous person in the room is the one most afraid of their own humanity. Some people love you in the morning and destroy you by nightfall. They can be warm, affectionate, generous, then cold, distant, or explosively angry without warning. You never quite know which version of them you're going to get. Every interaction feels like a gamble, every word like a trigger. And eventually you start to doubt yourself, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're constantly bracing for an emotional shift you didn't cause. This is the world of the complex personality, a person ruled not by logic or present reality, but by the raw, unhealed wounds of their unconscious past. To Carl Jung, complexes are emotional clusters formed by trauma, autonomous psychic fragments that carry intense feelings, memories, and associations. And when activated, they take over the individual, hijacking their thoughts, reactions, and behavior as if another personality has momentarily stepped in. Jung described complexes as splinter psyches, and for good reason. When someone is dominated by a complex, they're not reacting to you, they're reacting to a buried memory, a psychic injury, a ghost from their past wearing your face. Maybe your comment reminded them unconsciously of a parent who abandoned them. Maybe your silence triggered a fear of being invisible. Maybe your success echoed their deepest insecurity. But instead of naming these inner wounds, they respond as if the threat is coming from you. And you're left holding emotional shrapnel that doesn't belong to you. The tragedy is, they often don't know they're doing this. They believe their reactions are justified, rational. They will say you hurt them, you disrespected them, you triggered them. But in truth, you awakened something much older, much deeper, a complex that has remained unresolved and unintegrated for years, sometimes decades. Living with someone like this is like walking through a psychological war zone. One moment, it's calm. The next, the landmines go off. You don't know what set them off. You just know you're the one bleeding. And because the outbursts are often followed by regret, apologies, affection, or even shame, you begin to believe in the cycle. You cling to the good moments. You tell yourself they're not always like this. And you're right, they're not. But that doesn't make the pattern any less damaging, because unpredictability erodes safety, and no amount of love can grow in soil soaked in fear. Over time, you may begin to adapt. You learn to anticipate their moods. You shape your words carefully. You avoid certain topics. You shrink yourself not because you want to, but because surviving the relationship requires it. And in doing so, you slowly abandon pieces of yourself. Jung saw this dynamic as a kind of psychic possession. The complex doesn't just distort the person who holds it, it begins to colonize those around them. Their inner chaos becomes your outer reality. Their trauma becomes your emotional responsibility. And if you're not careful, their unconscious begins to shape your self-perception. But this doesn't make the complex person a monster. It makes them deeply human and deeply wounded. They are not choosing this behavior. They are being driven by it. And until they confront the original wound, the pattern will repeat over and over, with you, with others, with themselves. So what can you do? First, recognize the cycle. Name it. Stop gaslighting yourself into believing this is normal or healthy. Second, differentiate. Is this about me or about something in them they haven't faced? And most importantly, create space. Emotional space. Psychological space. Because healing does not happen in chaos, and you cannot help someone rise while they are unknowingly pulling you down. Jung taught that what we do not make conscious will return as fate, and the complex personality is living proof. They are trapped in a story they didn't write, reacting to scenes that no longer exist. But the moment you become conscious of the script, you are no longer a character in it. You are the witness. And from that place of awareness, you can choose something different. Not every wound comes from a weapon. Some come from a whisper, from a sigh, from a gaze that silently begs you to stay to listen, to give just a little more, until there's nothing left to give. This is the realm of the psychic vampire, the person who doesn't scream or manipulate in obvious ways, but drains you slowly, quietly, with subtle emotional dependency that masquerades as affection. They don't take your body. They take your attention, your presence, your time, your soul. At first, you feel needed, even special. They confide in you, call you their safe space, tell you how much better they feel after talking to you. It feels like a bond, like intimacy. But what you don't see, at least not right away, is that what they're offering isn't connection. It's consumption. They're not holding you, they're feeding on you. Carl Jung never used the term psychic vampire, but he warned about symbiotic relationships connections, where personal boundaries dissolve and one person becomes an extension of another's unmet needs. In these relationships, the line between love and obligation blurs, between empathy and emotional servitude, between helping and being used. You might recognize it now, that one person who always needs something, your comfort, your advice, your validation. And if you don't respond in the way they want, if you need space or silence or rest, they don't get angry. Not directly. Instead, they withdraw, they sulk, they become distant, passive-aggressive. They say things like, "I guess I was wrong about you. It's okay, I understand. You're too busy." And suddenly you feel guilty for wanting to breathe. This is how the psychic vampire works. They rarely ask directly. They guilt you silently. They don't shout. They sigh. Over time, you begin to anticipate their emotional hunger. You text back immediately. You drop your plans. You say yes when your entire body is screaming no. Not because you want to, but because you've been trained to respond. Because the price of saying no is too high: emotional distance, disappointment, a flood of guilt. And so you become their emotional caretaker. But who's taking care of you? Jung believed that the root of psychic vampirism lies in an individual's inability to self-regulate emotionally. These people have not learned to sit with discomfort, loneliness, or pain. So they outsource their emotional survival to others, often the most compassionate people they can find. But here's the truth: you cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot keep shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's hunger. And eventually your nervous system begins to rebel. You feel tired all the time. You dread hearing from them. You feel guilty for wanting distance, but exhausted when you stay. This is not just fatigue. This is energetic erosion. The slow disconnection from your own center as you orbit someone else's need. And it doesn't stop with exhaustion. It affects your sense of identity. You begin to lose track of who you are outside of the emotional role you play for them. You forget what peace feels like, what silence feels like, what it means to simply exist without being someone's emotional oxygen. But awareness is power. The psychic vampire is not evil. They are unwell, but you are not their healer. You are not their savior. You are not their emotional generator. Your energy is sacred. Your space is sacred. And anyone who makes you feel guilty for protecting those things does not belong in your inner circle. Jung taught that the path to wholeness requires separation, not from others, but from the illusions that keep us stuck. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave. Not with bitterness, not with blame, but with clarity. Because the greatest gift you can give the world is not your exhaustion, It's your full, whole, radiant self, rested, aware, and finally free. It's easy to hear all of this, the projection, the personas, the shadows, the vampires, and imagine that the danger is always outside of you, that the unconscious forces described are traits of other people. But what if they're not? What if in some moments of your life, you were the one projecting, you were the one who manipulated without knowing? You were the one who drained someone else's light to survive your own darkness? Carl Jung didn't create these psychological archetypes to help us label others. He created them to help us see ourselves. Because the most honest truth of all is this: no one is immune to the unconscious. Not you, not me, not anyone. We have all worn masks. We have all repressed parts of ourselves. We have all acted from wounds instead of wisdom. There were times you didn't know what you were doing, times you loved in ways that hurt, times you clung to someone because the silence inside yourself was too loud to bear. There were times when your unmet needs spoke louder than your words, when you needed someone to validate your worth because you had forgotten how to see it in yourself. And that's not evil. That's human. That's the complexity of the soul, divided between light and shadow, between consciousness and the unconscious, between the truth you tell the world and the one you hide even from yourself. Jung taught that the unconscious is not bad, it is simply unknown. And what is unknown often rules us. Until we face it, we repeat the same cycles. We attract the same people. We play the same roles. We call it fate, but really it's a reflection, a mirror. So the question isn't, are there unconscious people in my life? The question is, where am I still unconscious in mine? Maybe you've lived as a savior, always helping, always fixing, because you didn't know how to ask for help. Maybe you've lived as a performer, always composed, always strong, because you feared what might come out if you ever broke down. Maybe you've stayed in relationships that hurt you because the pain felt familiar and the unknown felt terrifying. But here's the radical truth Jung gave us: awareness changes everything. When you name the pattern, you weaken its grip. When you see the shadow, you begin to integrate it. And when you take back projection, you return to your own center. This isn't about shame, it's about liberation. Because the very moment you say, yes, I've done that too, you open the door to something sacred: compassion, not only for others, but for yourself. Compassion says, I didn't know better, but now I do. I was surviving, but now I choose to live. I was unconscious, but now I see. And when you see, really see, not only do you stop being the victim of others' unconsciousness, you stop unconsciously wounding the people who love you. You interrupt the cycle. You reclaim your inner authority. You begin to act not from fear or defense, but from wholeness. Because the final truth is, this healing doesn't come from calling out others. It comes from calling yourself back to your body, back to your boundaries, back to your emotions, back to your soul. So if this video stirred something in you, let it. Let it wake you. Let it discomfort you. Let it whisper, there's more to see. There's more to feel. There's more to become. Because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more conscious ones. And consciousness begins the moment you stop pointing outward and start looking within. In a world obsessed with productivity and appearances, we often forget to ask a more urgent question: who am I becoming in the relationships I keep? One of the most powerful lessons from Jungian psychology is that not all wounds come from overt abuse. Many of them come from subtle unconscious dynamics, from people who don't know they're hurting us, and from the parts of ourselves we've never dared to face. Whether it's the person who drains your energy in the name of love, or the one who judges you for expressing emotion, or even your own tendency to perform instead of connect the core message, is this what remains unconscious controls us? Until we make the unconscious conscious, we stay stuck in loops of emotional exhaustion, self-doubt, and inner fragmentation. The most profound advice we can draw from this is deceptively simple: pay attention. Notice how you feel around certain people. Do you feel energized or depleted, seen or symbolized? Are you shrinking to fit into someone's narrative, or expanding to express your truth? Emotional sovereignty begins with self-inquiry. Start asking, is this feeling mine or is it a projection? Am I responding to this moment or to an old wound? And most importantly, you are allowed to walk away from anything that costs your peace, your clarity, or your authenticity, even if no one else sees the harm. Conscious living isn't about being perfect. It's about being present, about choosing truth over role, self-respect, over obligation, and healing over repetition. In doing so, you not only reclaim your own life, you stop passing down unconscious pain to the next.